And now, more recently, Argentina. Now,
Mhm.
this is a country who's been in and out of creditors' offices, with the IMF and et cetera,
Sure.
for quite a while. I remember the default in the early 2000s, I think,
Yeah.
and there was the election last year. So talk me through there and how that emerged.
Sure. Argentina experienced a very sharp, real effective exchange rate shock after it had been going through an unpleasant period of adjustment of its exchange rate prior to the 2019 election, which was supported by a big IMF rescue package. The hope among locals, the hope among many locals, local investors, was that the center-right government run by Mauricio Macri would win the election and continue to steer the country on a center-right direction. In the summer of 19, when it became evident after a kind of preliminary, what's called the PASO in Argentina, they have a quirky electoral system, when it became clear that Macri would not be the next president, and the next president would be the center-left government run by Fernandez, who's currently the president. You just had a massive capital flight from the country, which put enormous pressure on the exchange rate, and Argentina faced a very sharp devaluation. As a result of that, because Argentina has a lot of debt denominated, sovereign debt is primarily denominated in FX, or has a lot of debt denominated in FX, all of a sudden debt looked from being kind of on the edge of being sustainable to being, well, certainly from a liquidity point of view, there was no way Argentina would access markets those conditions. And as a result, Argentina proceeded shortly after the inauguration of the president to work on a restructuring of creditors. That coincided shortly thereafter with, of course, the coronavirus crisis, which further exacerbated the challenge. Argentina has gone through coronavirus in a very painful way, certainly economically. Frankly, the country was an early adopter of lockdown, and Buenos Aires remains in lockdown, and we're in August at this point. So the fiscal numbers are terrible. Going through this crisis, of course, importantly, Argentina has worked out that they need to complete their debt operation so that sooner or later, when coronavirus ends, they can focus on the next big problem, which is rebooting the economy, given frankly the limited resources that it has. We got involved in Argentina before coronavirus in a, I would say, meaningful but not necessarily extravagant way, expecting a benign recovery, if you will, for creditors. When I say our involvement there, it crossed. So we were involved in sovereign debt, in provincial debt. So the provinces in Argentina have issued New York law U.S. dollar paper, and so they're also debtors, if you will. Although indeed much of their revenue comes from co-participation agreement with the federal. And then Argentine corporates, which are frankly not very levered because they haven't really had access to the borrowing. So we had a meaningful, but I would say not necessarily extravagant position in Argentina going into coronavirus. And then during the coronavirus crisis, Argentina debt traded extremely poorly. Part of that was, I would say, just the overall beta component, meaning markets all traded off, and so did Argentina. It's certainly not immune from broader market forces. And then part of that was a feeling that Argentina had taken its relationship with its external creditors, had taken a sharp U-turn for the worse. And certainly the posture of the government changed during coronavirus from one of seeking a quick and friendly deal to one of we're going to get in the trenches and really try to hardball. We took a view that Argentina's hardball strategy would ultimately fail. Argentina has no choice but to restructure its debt with its external creditors in advance of its upcoming IMF negotiations and ultimately. So we used the opportunity to practically double our position, actually, in Argentina. Frankly, that bet has worked out. We had an initial offer from Argentina that would have paid creditors 35 cents. That was back in March. That Argentina curiously went to the market with that proposal without seeking any kind of creditor group consent. The proposal fell sharply on its face. Argentina then quickly did a U-turn and then engaged with creditors And after a series of negotiations, we have the deal that's been finally announced and for which will be voted on actually next week. I think with a high degree of certainty, almost all bonds owned by external creditors will be tendered in and exchanged.